A stepmom wrote to me recently with something I hear a lot. She said, I try to keep the peace and not make a fuss, but then it all builds up and I end up snapping or just saying everything all in one go. She said she holds things in, lets things go, tells herself it's not worth bringing up, and then something small happens, and suddenly everything comes out. Not just that moment, but everything that's been sitting there for weeks. And afterwards, she feels awful. Like she's overreacted, made things worse, and that she should have handled it differently. And sometimes she even feels like she's the real-life embodiment of the wicked stepmother. If you've ever had that experience where you say nothing and then everything, this episode is for you. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Stepmum Space Listener Questions with me, Katie South, where each week I take one of your questions and talk it through, not just to reassure you, but to help you understand what might actually be happening underneath. As always, the names are anonymised, but the feelings and situations are very real. This week's question comes from Emma. She says, I try to keep the peace and not make a fuss, but then it all builds up and I end up exploding, snapping, or saying everything at once. Why do I do that and how can I stop? Now, if you recognise this pattern, you are definitely not alone. It's one of the most common things I see, and it's also one that carries a lot of shame, because afterwards it can feel like, I've just undone all my hard work. I should have handled that better. I can't believe I've been so stupid. But what's important to understand is this. There's usually something happening underneath that causes this. You don't just suddenly snap. So what's happening underneath is something I think of as a pressure release cycle. So on the surface, it looks like you stay quiet, you keep the peace, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, you explode. But actually, there's an awful lot happening before you get to the point of explosion. Most stepmoms don't hold things in because they don't have anything to say. They hold things in because it doesn't feel straightforward to say it. You're weighing things up. Is it my place to say something? Will I make it worse? Is this about me being too sensitive? Is it about my expectations being too high? Is it worth the tension it might create? And often you decide, I'll just leave it. And once you've done that a few times, it starts to build. A comment here, a moment there, a funny look here, something that didn't quite sit right with you. But each individual thing doesn't feel big enough to bring it up on its own. So it stays. And the thing about emotions is they don't just disappear because you've decided not to say anything. They accumulate quietly. So by the time something tips you over, you're not reacting to that one moment. You're reacting to everything that's been sitting underneath it, which is why it can feel like it all comes out at once, and why to other people it can look like a massive overreaction. But then afterwards, you're left holding the impact of all of it, feeling like you've overreacted, feeling like you've made things harder, feeling like you've made relationships more difficult. And that often leads to the next phase of the cycle. I won't do that again. I won't speak up. So you go back to holding things in. And round it goes. The key thing to understand here is this. You're not just bottling things up. You're holding way too much for too long in a situation that doesn't feel emotionally safe enough to say it earlier. And that word safe is really important here, because this isn't usually about physical safety. It's about emotional safety. And I say emotional safety because we're not normally talking about physical safety. Emotional safety is about how safe you feel your emotions are held in the environment. How will this land? Will I be understood? Will it create tension? Will it affect the dynamic with the kids? When all of those things feel uncertain and you don't feel emotionally safe, it makes sense that you hold back. But the cost of holding back is that everything gets stored rather than processed. Okay? And stored emotion tends to come out under pressure. Not calmly, not neatly, not rationally, but all at once. So the goal here isn't to never snap. It's to interrupt that cycle earlier, let a bit of the pressure out before it builds. And that usually means two things. Firstly, recognizing the build-up sooner, not waiting until you're already at breaking point, but noticing, that didn't sit quite right with me. Or I can feel that just lingering with me. And secondly, feeling more able to say things earlier in a way that actually feels good. Not perfectly, not in a scripted way, but in a way that doesn't leave everything sitting unsaid. Because when that happens, you don't get the same build-up. And without the build-up, you don't get the same explosion. So this pattern, saying nothing and then saying everything, is something I see a lot in women because it's one of the key ways stepfamily dynamics end up taking over emotionally. We're going to look at this inside Back in Control. We'll look at what's making it harder to say things earlier, how the build-up's happening, and how to interrupt that cycle so it doesn't keep repeating. We're not talking about just changing what you say. We're talking about when you say it, how you hold it, and how you land it in your relationship. So to Emma and anyone who's listening who recognize themselves, nothing is wrong with you. You are not too much. You are not over-emotional. You are not irrational. You are in a pattern that builds pressure and then releases it all at once instead of gradually letting it out so the pressure never builds too much. And that pattern can change. If you're listening and thinking, yes, that is exactly what I do, this isn't just going to fix itself without a bit of work. It usually repeats. And this is the work we're doing inside Back in Control. We start April 17th and there are just a couple of spaces left. You can find the details in the show notes or message me directly if you want to talk it through. My details are in the show notes. And if you know another stepmom who might recognise herself in this episode, send it to her. Because one of the hardest parts of stepmothering is thinking you're the only one feeling like this and doing these things. You're not. I'll be back next week with another listener question. Till then, take care. And before we finish, if you're listening to Stepmum Space and recognising yourself in the constant adjustment, the walking on eggshells, the anticipatory anxiety before contact, or the way one message can derail your whole week, that doesn't make you weak. It's a position many stepmums find themselves pulled into inside complex stepfamily systems, and it's more common than people realise. Back in Control is my structured program for stepmums who are ready to move out of chronic vigilance and into steadiness inside their own home. It's psychologically grounded, contained, and designed specifically for stepfamilies where dynamics feel destabilising. If you're ready for more than just insight, search Stepmum Space Back in Control and you'll find the details. Back in Control, structured support for stepmums who are done walking on eggshells and are ready to feel steady again.